I'm really excited about today's video because I'm going to be reviewing the new Nightfox DV2 thermal camera. Nightfox sent me this camera about a month ago, so thank you so much, Nightfox. I have really enjoyed trialing this camera and I'm really looking forward to continue using it in my wildlife watching ventures moving forwards. So I tried out the camera in different environments, temperatures, in the daytime and at night so that I could provide you with a detailed review of it. When I received this, I was really excited to see how it might potentially enrich my different wildlife watching ventures. And so I've trialed it throughout some of those ventures and I'm going to share those experiences with you in this video, share some of the footage I got with the DV2 camera, talk about its different features, and generally provide a review for you. So let's start by looking at the DV2 and its features. So the camera arrived in a carry case along with some accessories, a battery charger, a USB to C lead and a carry strap. I found it very simple to use. I didn't need to spend a lot of time working it out. It is touchscreen, which is great, especially when you're trying to be very quiet when wildlife watching. So no clunky buttons for changing the mode, for example. It has a menu down the side of the screen with two parts to it, and to switch between, you just click on the end menu option. The top option is the one you're most likely to use, and this is where you find the different heat source viewing modes. So the options you have are Super Bird mode, which is white on black, Black Bird mode, which is black on white, and then you have similar modes, but these aren't specifically for birds, so white hot mode and black hot mode. Then there is red hot, iron red and night vision, or what I like to call kryptonite mode, which is a bright green on black. Of course, I tried out all these modes, so here they are in order. This is the Super Bird mode at night, looking to see who might be roosting in trees bordering my garden. And you can see here that it's very clear there are a couple of pigeons or doves sat in the tree. You can also see how when I move around the tree, the visibility goes where thick foliage is obscuring the view, and I'll talk more about foliage later. But this is a good mode for night in my opinion because the background is dark and the heat source white. So when walking around in the dark looking at a screen, you're not being blinded by a mainly white screen. So I would personally use Super Bird mode at night, and in the day I've been using both bird modes because it doesn't matter as much. Here is Blackbird mode, so black heat source, but the foliage in the tree is mostly blocking this bird, although it is very clear there is something there from the black heat source. And with both of these examples, I wouldn't have been able to spot the bird. So in both cases, the DV2 showed me that there was a heat source in the tree. Here is the white hot mode, and I found that like with the bird modes at night, I preferred using the white heat source image on a dark background for the reasons that I said before. So here is an example of the white hot mode, which is white heat source on black. I went looking for foxes at night on a recent trip to Dungeness, and I was watching this vixen from my car with the DV2 camera because it was pitch black, so this was the only way to watch her. So you can see her in the white hot mode, and then you can see her in the black hot mode. And this is the black hot mode with a young hedgehog that visits my garden, so showing black on white. Next is red hot, and you can see the difference between the white hot and the red hot mode here. So here you can see my dog in white hot mode, and you can see how the hottest parts of him are his paws, his nose, mouth, and you can see where he is losing body heat through gaps in his fur. Then if I switch to red hot mode, you can see that the red is the hottest point. I think that the red hot is the mode I've used the least, but there could be something in having more of a distinction between the heat levels with that mode. I really like this next mode, the iron red mode, for any time of day or night, because this mode seems to show heat difference more prominently than the other modes, or at least it does to me. So for example, as you can see here with the same vixen I was watching, you can see how her back is darker because it's insulated with thick fur, so not so much of her body heat is showing through, but then it's slightly lighter on the other parts of her body where her fur is thinner,
and her face, ears and underside is showing through as lightest, with white being the hottest areas because these are the least insulated, so you can see the body heat. When she turns, you can also see her body heat through gaps in her fur. I had fun experimenting with this camera, and you can see how the iron red mode shows the different heat levels. So I'm placing my hand in a stream here, and you can see it go colder. And you can even see the water heat up around my hand, which is amazing. Then you can see my hand gradually get warmer once back out of the cold water. And this time with my other dog, you can see here that he has dark paws as he's just been paddling in the stream. And you can see the hottest point visible is his tongue. Finally is the night vision mode, or the kryptonite mode, as I said, I like to call it, where the heat source glows green. And with the same vixen, here she is in that mode with the hotter parts a brighter, lighter green.
Looking through the footage that I got on the DV2, I can see that I tended to use the iron red mode and the white hot modes, both the bird one and the other. I'd really like to try out the two bird modes even more, especially for looking up into trees during the daytime to help me find birds, to help me film with my other camera. But I feel like I need to wait until autumn, winter, and as much as spring as possible for this, because thermal cameras don't see through foliage. So summer is the trickiest time to use one for those purposes. What this camera was really good at doing is helping to see if there was a heat source in between gaps in foliage. So I was able to identify heat sources amongst, say, leaves on a tree or gaps in a hedge where I wouldn't be able to see that there was a bird or animal there with the naked eye. So it's definitely really helpful to identify a heat source sort of in the depths of foliage where there are gaps. In a similar example, I was out looking for wildlife and I used the DV2 to scan the area, and I was pretty surprised to see that there was a fox sat just behind a picket fence, which wasn't that far away from me, and I would never have known it was there, but because I used the DV2, I was able to then set up my main camera and hope that the fox would venture out from behind the fence, and I was then in a position to film, which was great. So I was pretty impressed with that, and it definitely helped me in that situation. Okay, so that's it for modes. Let's go back to the camera and I will show you some of the other features that it has. There is a tracking feature that shows you the highest temperature on the screen. And this really came in when I was trying to find a squirrel that was running about in the tree canopy above me when I was on a walk. I could hear it, but I couldn't spot it. And if I did spot it, I wasn't fast enough to track it on its movement through the trees. So I used this feature and it did indeed track the squirrel in its movements, meaning I was able to get this shot of it running through the trees on the DV2. So I didn't actually find myself using this feature a huge amount, but I can see how it would come in very handy, especially I think if the screen was quite busy, there were different shades of heat. This would be quick to pick out the highest temperature. Another feature is a laser pointer, and this is synced to a target on the screen. So this is really helpful for showing you where the wildlife actually is that the DV2 is picking up. So let's say you are looking out across a landscape or maybe up into a tree canopy, and the camera shows you that there is a heat source there, but every time you look with the naked eye, you can't actually work out where that heat source is supposed to be. You could then turn on the laser, make sure the target on the screen is on the heat source, and then look at where the laser dot is, and you found your heat source. So this is really helpful, especially at nighttime or when looking at a very similar landscape, because looking at a thermal camera screen can be a little bit disorientating because it's not always that easy to see landmarks on it, and distance can be quite hard to gauge as well. So the laser pointer is very helpful. Another feature, which is a button on the camera, is a torch. This is at the bottom of the camera, so it shines directly to your feet as you're holding the camera. This is great as it doesn't interfere with your view at all, but does show you where you're walking, which is very helpful at nighttime, especially when you have a bright screen in front of you. Another feature is a tripod mount, so that you don't have to be holding the camera at all times, and I can definitely see this coming in the future so that I can have the DV2 set up pointing in a certain direction and my camera set up pointing in the same direction. And being able to have that on a tripod means I don't have to keep holding it up and repositioning it and working out exactly what I'm looking at through it. And it means that I'm also ready to pick up my camera or move to my camera on another tripod and switch between the two quickly. So I can see the tripod mount being very useful for that purpose. As you've seen from the footage, you can record video with the DV2, you can also take photographs, and you can look through a gallery of the photographs and videos that you've taken on the camera. You can easily connect it to the computer and copy that footage across as well. The battery life is incredible, up to 8 hours, and so is the storage. It has 15 hours of video space with an integrated 32GB memory card. I will link the website below this video so that you can read into the other features the camera has in more detail and the specifications. So as I said, I've been using this camera for a month now in different environments for wildlife watching, and I've got some more examples of it in use to show you. I found it helpful for spotting wildlife at a distance.
So here is an example of how I saw 2 rabbits with the DV2 and could then film them with my camera. Prior to seeing them with the DV2, I'd been sat there for quite a long time and I hadn't spotted them. They were very far in the distance, so this shot of them is full zoom on my 400mm lens.
I also used the DV2 on a visit to a place in Cornwall that I like to visit for wildlife watching, called Botalic. It's such a wild landscape there, and I've always wondered what wildlife is around there at night time. So I visited there just before the sun went down so that I could trial the camera in the daylight, and then I stayed there after it had gone dark, and I was quite surprised by what I saw there.
This is what I captured looking out over one of the fields at Botalic, and I was pretty shocked by how much activity was going on, bearing in mind I just arrived at that field and I couldn't see anything myself because it was pitch black. You can see some rabbits here, but I was excited to see this stotal weasel running through the field. You can see its head popping up again here, and then again before it disappeared behind a wall. And then we also have a fox.
As I said, I was there in the daylight too, and I did a bit of experimenting with the DV2 with birds that were flying around in the area. I was actually quite surprised at how far away, how high up some of the birds were that the DV2 still picked up on camera as a heat source. So the DV2 spec says that it has a detection range of 300 meters for a 1.8 meter object, 250 meters for a 1.5 meter object, and that continues down to 50 meters for a 0.3 meter object. I would say that the camera actually picked up birds that were about 0.3 meters or slightly more than that from far further than the detection range that is listed here. There are quite a few ruins at Botalic, and something else that I noticed while I was there is that a lot of the rocks around the area were showing up quite brightly as heat sources. So it had been a really hot day and I was there in the evening, which means that the rocks had had all day to heat up. When I was planning this video, I reached out through a YouTube post to ask if any of you had any questions or comments about me trialing a thermal camera. And one of you did say that thermal cameras work best when the temperature contrast of the subject is different to the surrounding environment, and that this will of course vary with the time of day and the weather, etc. And as I say, I did notice this when visiting in the evening after a very hot day. And as that viewer said, if I were to have gone out on a cold evening or morning, the contrast would have been greater. So I did notice that to an extent, but this thermal camera actually has 2 viewing modes: a green eye high definition mode for detailed observations in cold and dry weather, and an orange mode, which is a highlight mode for enhanced target detection in hot or wet weather conditions. I've actually only used the orange mode so far, so all the footage that I'm showing you throughout this video is the orange mode and it's not the high definition mode. And that's because I've been using the camera in the summer and the weather has been hot and or rainy. But this mode could be the reason why the weather conditions haven't stopped the effectiveness of the camera. So even with quite a lot of heat sources around, I was able to identify when there was some wildlife in the area, because where it was hotter than, say, the rocks in this example, it would show through on the camera as whiter or whatever colour was the hottest on the mode that I was using. So I don't know how the camera does this exactly, but I do know that the weather didn't really impact the ability of the thermal camera to highlight where wildlife was. It just takes that bit of getting used to when you're looking at the screen when quite a few objects are showing up as heat sources. As and when I trial the green eye mode, as we get deeper into autumn and then winter, I would be very happy to report back to anyone who's particularly interested to hear how that mode performs or what that looks like. So if you are interested in that, do let me know in the comments. So as well as that comment, I did have a question about weather conditions, and I think my explanation covers that as much as possible at this point. I also had a question about foliage, and I have touched on that, and I did notice that the camera helped me to find heat sources in the depths of foliage, but only where there were gaps. I also had a question about distance, which again I have talked about a little bit. So I've talked about the detection range. So I use this camera for looking out across large expanses of land, and it picked up heat sources for as far away as I can see, and also as far away as I could then film with my 400mm lens. I also used it looking out of a hide across wetlands, and it was again picking up heat sources. So whilst I can't give you exact measurements from my experiences, I can tell you that I never had an issue with the range that it covers. I don't really personally see what the use would be in it having a longer range. So it definitely covered the full range that I would personally find useful in wildlife watching. I had a comment about using it for observing nocturnal wildlife activity, which I have partly covered when talking about my nighttime trip to Botanic here in Cornwall. But in that comment, owls were mentioned specifically, and that comment really resonated with me because one of the main reasons that I have wanted a thermal camera for such a long time is to help me to find owls in the daylight, as well as to observe them at nighttime. I think for that I need to wait until there are less leaves on the trees. Then it will be far easier to use the camera for that purpose, but that's something I definitely want to do. So look out for that in future videos, because I will always refer to this camera in videos as and when I use it. So finally then, my sort of conclusion to this review. I've never used a thermal camera before, but as I said, I have wanted one for a long time to help with my wildlife watching ventures, specifically finding wildlife and observing wildlife at night. Having trialed the Nightfox DV2, I'm really happy to report that it really did enrich those ventures, and whilst I don't have a point of comparison with other thermal cameras, I had very strong ideas of what I wanted from a thermal camera, and the Nightfox DV2 ticked all of those boxes. I actually really struggled to find anything to say in way of critique of the camera. So this actually did more than tick boxes, because I discovered features that the DV2 has that I hadn't even realised I would need, like the laser pointer and the torch, for example. It definitely helped me to find wildlife. So if you enjoy observing wildlife like me and you want help spotting wildlife like me for photography or videography, this does provide more opportunities to do those things, especially of course after dark for observing. Nightfox promote this camera as being for ecological research, and I can definitely see how it would be very useful for that. As I said, I really couldn't find anything to say as a critique of this camera. It does everything that I would want from a thermal camera, and I'm really looking forward to using it in the future. I really hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, I would do my best to answer them, so please do put them in the comments section. And if you're interested in investing in a thermal camera, a lot of cameras out there I found are £1,000 or more, but this camera is £499 £10 at the time that I'm making this video, and if you use my code you can get a 5% discount as well. So I'll put that in the description if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe to support my channel, and I will see you next time.